We're going to continue our summer series looking at a number of miracles that Jesus performs. And this particular miracle that we're going to look at today is about a man who is possessed by a demon and who is going to be healed. Now, this sounds very familiar to another miracle that we looked at from Mark chapter 1, where Jesus healed a man who was possessed by a demon. However, this one is a little bit different. The first one that we looked at, where the demon-possessed man came into the synagogue and Jesus healed him, was more about the actual substance of the miracle, namely that Jesus rules and reigns over the evil spiritual forces. This particular miracle, however, is more about the responses that people had to Jesus' work. The sign he performs displays his rule and reign over all things, especially the spiritual realm. And yet, interestingly, there are two different responses that happen. Some people respond to Jesus' example of his rule and reign as the supreme authority over all things by telling him they want nothing to do with him. Get out of here. And yet there's another response of a man begging to be with Jesus forever. And so we're going to be looking at these two responses to Jesus' rule and reign as he demonstrates how he is the supreme authority over all things. There is either a repulsion or there is an attraction. Kind of think of it like a magnet. I know you've ever had two magnets. Kids love to play with magnets. You know, one side's a positive, one side's a negative. So you have like one magnet, and then you take the other one, and if they're opposites, then they'll attract, and they click together. Boop, and you're like, yay! However, if you take the magnet and you flip it, then it's kind of fun too, because you're like, it's going to work this time. And they don't go together. What's interesting is it's the same magnet. Nothing's really changed. You just flipped it over, and all of a sudden it's repulsing. But you flip it back over, and it's attracting. What we see in this miracle is it's the same Jesus performing the same miracle that a bunch of people are witnesses to, but you have some people repulsed by it and other people attracted to it. And that's the way it is with the gospel. That's the way it is with Christ. Even amongst us who are gathered in this place, some of us are attracted to Jesus. Others of us would like more distance between he and I. And that's the nature of it. And so we'll pick it up in verse 1 of Mark 5. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with the chain. For he'd often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. People came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. He did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. What a story. First time I read it, the thing that stood out to me was pigs. I just envisioned 2,000 pigs running down a hill, drowning, and just what that would have looked like. Bloated, But the pigs are important, believe it or not. Why it's important is because it helps us with understanding the setting of this story. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to break down this story into 3 parts. We're going to look at the setting, and then we're going to look at the confrontation between the demon-possessed man and Jesus himself, and then we'll look at the 2 ways in which the people respond to Jesus. And then what we'll do at the end of the sermon is we'll look at 3 things that we can take away from this particular miracle, because if you remember, our summer series is all about the miracles as signs, and they point beyond themselves. That's what signs do. They point your attention to something beyond the sign itself. And so as we look at this miracle, we ask ourselves the question, what does it point me to? And we'll look at those 3 things at the end. But let's begin with the setting. We'll start in verse 1, that they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And so when we said this earlier throughout our series this summer, but when Jesus goes to the other side of the sea, it's the Sea of Galilee, he's generally going to what is called Gentile territory. He's going to the other side of the sea where there's a lot of non-Jews that are living there. And so when Jesus crosses the sea and goes to the country of the Gerasenes, he's entering into Gentile territory. And one reason why we know that is because there's the presence of 2,000 pigs. Now, how do we know the presence of 2,000 pigs signifies that it's a Gentile area? Because of this law that we read about in Deuteronomy 14. And the pig, because it parts the hoof but does not chew the cud, is unclean for you. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. This is a law for the nation of Israel. And so, if you have a law like this, you typically won't be a pig farmer, because there's no money in it. You can't sell it to your fellow people. Nobody's going to eat it. And you can't really touch your pigs once they die. And so now we know that he has come into a Gentile area. And we know he's come into an area, not particularly a city, because it says the country of the Gerasenes. Now, here's the interesting thing is there's a lot of debate about where this actually is taking place. And some people will say it's actually a contradiction in the Bible because Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a different name for where this episode takes place. And so I want to encourage us that if you look in Mark, he says the country of the Gerasenes. He doesn't necessarily mean a city. He just means a region, an area, a territory, a country. Where you have Matthew and Luke will designate the area probably more according to its city rather than its region. Now, let me give you an example of how this works. Say somebody from out of state comes to you and they say, hey, what's the best Chinese food you ever ate? And you could say something like, the best Chinese food I ever ate is in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has the best Chinese food. And people are like, I beg to differ, like Nebraska has the best. And you're like, I've never been to Nebraska, but I know that they don't. I don't know. You could say that. Let's say somebody from the Bay Area, anyways, comes to you and says, what's the best Chinese food that you ever had? And if you said the Bay Area, they would look at you like, well, duh. But now you say, actually, San Francisco has the best Chinese food I've ever had. And they're like, oh, okay. And they're like, actually, I think whatever. But let's say somebody who's a citizen of San Francisco, they live there. They're like, what's the best Chinese food you ever had? You wouldn't tell them, San Francisco has the best. They're like, okay, what place? And hopefully, my favorite is the House of Nanking. And so I would tell people, the House of Nanking. Somebody knows what's up. And so I could say it's in the Broadway area, it's near Chinatown, that kind of thing. And so I could give a more specific location. So if you think about what I just said, I could say the House of Nanking, I could say Chinatown, I could say Broadway area, I could say San Francisco, I could say Bay Area. Just because I say those 3 designations doesn't mean I'm contradicting myself. Does that make sense? I'm just giving more and more information, larger to smaller. And so that's what we find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is they're giving different information, and maybe a region, maybe a city, all that kind of stuff, so I wouldn't fret too much about it. But what Jesus does when he gets to the other side of the sea in the land of the Gentiles, verse 2, he steps out of the boat, and immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Just in case you're confused. It doesn't mean he crawled out of a tomb in the sense that he was dead, now he's alive. It's that he was living in the tombs. And this is a man with an unclean spirit. What does that mean to have an unclean spirit? In the Old Testament, we have the ceremonial word unclean. And if you notice from our Deuteronomy passage, if you touch a pig or eat its flesh, you're unclean. It's an unclean animal. It means ceremonially, you are unclean. You can't come into God's presence. You can't go to the temple. You can't worship. You're unclean. And so here's a particular man who is designated as being unclean because of the unclean spirit that possesses him, which means he is disqualified from being in God's presence. He is ceremonially impure. He cannot be in the temple. He is not a worshiper of God, and all of these kinds of things. Because the unclean spirit, he himself is unclean. This unclean man is living a wretched life. He is tormented and oppressed by a demon possession. He's unable to be helped by others. We see this in verse 3 through 5. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. Now watch this. No one had the strength to subdue him. I kind of feel like that's a foreshadowing. Like no one is able to help this man. Wink, wink. But pretty soon you're going to be introduced to somebody who can. Verse 5, night and day. Among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. This man's life is miserable. People didn't want him to be around. He's an embarrassment to society. In order to control the man and his behavior, they put him in chains and shackles. Now, the interesting thing about going to the tombs is, like nobody goes to, graveyards and tombs to have picnics. It's an eerie place. It's a scary place. It's a place that haunts you in your nightmares. And the same for these folks. And yet this man is living there. And it sounds like not by choice. People dragged him out of the city, shackled him, and chained him like a dog in the tombs. Out of sight, out of mind. He's a nuisance. We don't have to deal with him. Just get him out of here. And that's what they did. Except for the chains and shackles were no match for the supernatural strength he had because of the demon possession. We read that no one had the strength to subdue him. This man was able somehow to break free of the chains, break free of the shackles. This is a man living in the tombs and the land filled with pigs, an unclean man. When you think about these things and you read something like Isaiah 65 is a chapter that has to do with God's judgment and salvation. And at the beginning of the chapter, he talks about the people to whom are doing evil and all that kind of stuff and how they're going to receive God's judgment. One of the descriptors of those who will receive God's judgment is found in verse 4. They're the ones who sit in tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat pig's flesh, and broth of tainted meat is in their vessels. These are the ones who get God's judgment. In other words, when you look at this man, you see he's unclean. He cannot be helped. He is tormented. He is distant from God. He's living a wretched, miserable life. And so this man comes to Jesus. Verse 6 through 13, what we're going to see now, having set the kind of setting of what's going on, we're going to see this clash. There's going to be a clash between the power of darkness and the kingdom of God. In verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." Because Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." So as the man approaches Jesus, Jesus is saying to the man and the spirit to come out of him. And while he's saying that, the man is screaming back at Jesus, "What have you to do with me, Son of the Most High God? Don't torment me." And so what's happening is we see this clash. Because this demon-possessed man knows that he is under the power of darkness, and he knows Jesus' name and knows his identity, that Jesus comes in the name of the Lord. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of light. And as you know from throughout the Bible and just experience, light and darkness, they don't go together. They're opposites. So this demon, knowing that he is a principal subject of the kingdom of darkness, sees Jesus coming ashore and knows that he is the principal ruler of the kingdom of light. And there's going to be animosity. There's going to be a fight. There is going to be a clash of sorts. He questions Jesus by asking this question, what have you to do with me? Now, you can't see it in the English, but this is an idiom. It's a Hebrew idiom. Now, what is an idiom? An idiom is an expression or a saying that we have in language where if you just took the individual words and you defined them according to the dictionary and then you put them back in their sequence, it would make no sense. For instance, we have this. It's raining outside like cats and dogs. What? And so we have to explain to young children, if you say that expression, grandma says it, it's raining cats and dogs outside, and the 5-year-old looks up, and a light bulb just went off. I know what they're thinking. And they go outside with a blanket, and they're trying to catch their next puppy or kittens. They'll take either. We know what rain is, we know what a cat is, we know what a dog is, we know what outside is, but you put them all together in that sequence and you're like, what are you talking about? And that's an idiom. And that's what we have in this text here. What have you to do with me? They try to translate the idiom into something that makes sense, but if you were to leave it untranslated and just look at the words, it would say this: what to me and to you. I know what the word what means, and I know to me, and I know the word and I know the word to you, but when you put them all together, what to me and to you? I don't know. What did you just say? And it makes no sense. But for the Jewish person, this idiom, it means something like this: why are you butting in where you don't belong? It kind of means why are you sticking your nose in something that ain't your business? Or, mind your own business. Who do you think you are? The way that the New Living Translation of the Bible translates it, they try to capture the idiom. They translate it like this: why are you interfering with me? And so that's a good picture of what's happening here. Now imagine, the demon knows that Jesus has come. Satan knows who Jesus is and what he represents. He also knows who he is and what he represents, and knows there's going to be a clash. And then says to Jesus, when Jesus approaches, get out of my business, Jesus. You don't belong here. What are you doing interfering with my business? Mind your own business. That's kind of what's happening. It's a similar thing that we read in Mark 1. The demon-possessed man comes into the synagogue. He has an unclean spirit. He cries out in verse 24, what have you to do with us? Now notice he calls him Jesus of Nazareth. It's really interesting that the demons know who Jesus is. But then the question that this particular demon-possessed man asks is, have you come to destroy us? Have you come to destroy us? Now let's go back to Mark chapter 5 and we'll see what this man asks. He doesn't really ask, he begs, I adjure you, I swear by God, do not torment me. Do not torment me. Because the demon-possessed man knows that Jesus has come to expel evil and has come to resolve sin. And because that's Jesus' purpose, the demon-possessed man knows, I'm in his line of sight, and I know that this is a clash, and I know we don't belong together, and I know Jesus has come to destroy me, to torment me. But what's interesting is the demon-possessed man swears by God. What is he doing swearing by his enemy? That makes no sense. Shouldn't he swear by Satan? Why does he swear by God? And I think the answer comes in Matthew chapter 8, which is the chapter that has this Matthew's version of this healing. And what's interesting, in verse 29, we see the same kind of situation, but there's something unique about it, where the demon-possessed man says, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God?" There's the identity. I know who you are. I know what you came to do. "Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now, those last three words there, "before the time," are significant. Because what that means is the demon understands that there's coming a day in the future, at an appointed time in which God sets, where there will be all-out war. There will be a spiritual battle unlike anything any of us have ever even thought or imagined, and it will be between the forces of darkness and the forces of God. And until that time, the demons are like, "Jesus, well, hold up, time out. You can't call them all up on earth and torment us and kill us and stuff. It's not the time yet for all that war. And by the way, Jesus, you got to play by your own rules." And so it's kind of the way in which the demon is saying, "You can't touch me. It's not time yet." And it reminds me of my brother and I when we were kids. And my brother would say, "Get out of my room." And I would stand in the doorway. "I'm not in your room." "Get out of my sight. You can't see me." You know? And just being a punk. So anyways, that's what the demon-possessed man is doing. "Jesus, you got to play by your own rules. God set the time and day for when the war is going to happen. You don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I know it ain't going to happen today. Today's just a Thursday. It ain't wartime. And so you can't touch me." And what I want us to realize, brothers and sisters, is there is, in fact, a spiritual war all around us. There's skirmishes here and there. This is one example. But oftentimes the spiritual war that's being raged all around us, whether or not we see it, it's there, and it's more than meets the eye. There's more at work around us, more evil and more warfare, spiritual warfare around us than we can even see or understand or comprehend. And how I know that is it's hinted at in verse 9. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" Now, if you just stop and go, okay, why did Jesus all of a sudden just out of left field just ask this man his name? Like it just came out of nowhere, like, wait, what? But watch how the man replies. "My name is Legion, for we are many." Whoa. You see, I think with the eyes to see that Jesus possesses, he looks at the man and realizes as the man is talking to him, I am not dealing with a singular demon and a singular man. There's more that meets the eye. "What's your name?" "I'm Legion, for we are many." I thought something was different about this. You see, brothers and sisters, this is a clash between the power of darkness and the kingdom of God. There's skirmishes throughout the Bible in which this takes place. We remember one from Mark chapter 3, where Jesus is being accused of being able to cast out demons because he himself is possessed by demons, if you remember. The scribes come down from Jerusalem. They said that Jesus is possessed by Beelzebub, which is another name for Satan or the devil. And by the prince of demons, he cast out demons. So that's their accusations. And so Jesus called them to him and said to them in parables, he's telling them this little story, this little illustration. He asked these questions. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is coming to an end. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, then indeed he may plunder his house." So what Jesus is teaching here is Satan is a strong man, and Satan has a house. And I've come to bind him and rob his house. What does that mean? Is Jesus a thief? Well, you could say so. What he intends to do, he intends to bind Satan from continuing to blind and deceive the world. And while Satan is bound, he's going to go take back what is rightfully his. So the house in this story represents the kingdom of darkness. And Jesus has come into time and space in the midst of this kingdom of darkness to take back what is rightfully his. And the demon knows this. He knows that that's why the Son of the Most High God has come. I know that you've come, and I know that you're going to bind my master, the demon says, and you're going to take from us what we think is ours. But you can't do it because it's not the time yet. So there's skirmishes, there's spiritual war. Jesus is engaged in it, and you and I, if we believe in Jesus, are also engaged in it, whether or not we recognize it. There's more than meets the eye. It's not just one man with one demon, but there's thousands of demons in this one man. That's a weird thing to think about in today's age, because we don't typically think of the world as being filled with angels and demons. We do not wrestle, Paul says, against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. I don't know if we recognize this or not, but all around us there are forces of evil at play. The presence of darkness is all around us. There's cosmic powers and authorities and rulers which are against God and against God's people, and that is happening all around us. But do you have the eyes to see? Because oftentimes we just would rather bury our head in the sand and ignore it. But there's a war. And as we learned a few weeks ago, the war is taking place in the realm of ideas and knowledge and argumentation and in the minds and hearts of people all over the world. And so what happens is the demon, because he knows that Jesus isn't allowed to ultimately destroy him, because it's not the time yet, makes a request of Jesus, verse 10 to 13. This demon-possessed man begged Jesus earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now, a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." And so he gave them permission. What a thought. Even the demons have to ask Jesus' permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. Jesus gave his permission. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. This demon begs Jesus not to send him out of the country. Now, you could interpret this as like, oh, there's certain parts of the world which are more demon-possessed than others. That may be true. I don't know that to be the case. I don't know. The Bible doesn't necessarily speak on that definitively. But what I do know is this, is that there is, in Luke chapter 8, a sense in which there is some non-earthly place that is the destination of demons and Satan. Here's what I mean. In Luke chapter 8, the way Luke records it is that the demon-possessed man begged Jesus not to command them to depart into the abyss. What is that? Good question. Jude chapter 6, we learn of this abyss-like place. In the heavenly realm, the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling, that's where the angels came from. Angels are fallen demons. They would not stay in their proper place under the authority of God, but they did other things. What God has done is he has kept them in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So I think when we learn in Mark 5 that Matthew 8, that the demon-possessed man says, "Are you trying to torment me before the time?" I think the time is in Jude 6 in reference to the great day of judgment when there's going to be a great cosmic war. But until that day comes, Satan and his dominions have been bound in gloomy darkness with chains. until the day they will be released for the final battle. And I think how Jesus comes and binds Satan and his demons is none other than through his life, death, and resurrection, which we'll get to in a minute. But what you see here is that these fallen angels, they're in abyss, gloomy darkness, and one day they will have the all-out war. And so these demons are like, I don't want to go there yet. I don't want to go to the abyss. Can you just send us into the pigs? And so Jesus gives them permission, sends them into the pigs. And what happens to the pigs? They rush down and they die. Brothers and sisters, if that is not a vivid image of what Satan and the demons want to do and accomplish, then you're not seeing it. You see, in John chapter 10, Jesus said that the enemy, Satan himself, has come to steal and to kill and to destroy. So when it seems as if evil will get us good, just know God is not in that. And the reason is because when Jesus was tempted, if you remember, 3 times Satan said things like, hey, if you just worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the earth. Hey, if you just jump off the temple and take a nosedive, God will save you. How about you turn this rock into bread? And with each of those temptations, it seems like Satan was having Jesus' good in mind. Is it good to have that kind of authority and power? Is it good that God will rescue you from hard things? Is it good to be fed when you're hungry? So it seems like Satan wants good things for you, but we must remember, even if he promises what seems to be good things, the spiritual warfare all around us is not quite what we think it is. And he's seeking to kill you, not to give you life. He's seeking to destroy you, not to give you hope. He hates you. He deceives. He manipulates. He lies. He accuses. That's what the power of darkness and Satan himself has come to do. Now, there's going to be a response to this. How will the people respond to 2,000 pigs rushing down and drowning in the sea? The herdsmen, they fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion. He was sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They didn't come and see Jesus and the man clothed and in his right mind and go, oh, what happened to you? Praise God, look at you. You're healed. Instead, they see him. And they look at Jesus. And what strikes their heart is terror. So much so that we read in verse 17, they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. They see Jesus, they see the man, and they go, we want you out of here. We want you out of here. You are disrupting our way of life. You are a danger to our business. You are upsetting the way in which we live. You are ruining our lives. Get out of here. We don't want you here. And brothers and sisters, that oftentimes is the way in which people respond to Jesus when they hear of him, even today. Because Jesus commands of us everything. I want it all. As C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity, discipleship isn't Jesus coming to you and pruning you like a tree, take a little limb here off and a limb there off. Jesus comes to you and says, I want the whole tree down. I want your mind. I want your heart. I want to be the master of what you think and how you think. I want to be the master of what you feel and what you desire. I want to be the master of your behavior. I want to be the master of your life. And people will say, that's a little much. That's pretty disruptive. I don't know if I'm down for that kind of stuff. Jesus, you can have my family, but you do not tell me what I'm going to do with my time or my money. That's mine. You're dangerous, Jesus. You want me to leave the comforts of America to go serve people in a dangerous place? What did the demon say to Jesus? What have you to do with me, Jesus? I think here in America we might say something like this: Jesus, I don't think this is an area of my life that you need to be butting in on. You don't need to be telling me how to spend my money, spend my time, who to hang out with, what to do. Nah, that's mine. All the spiritual stuff, all right, I'll give you that. But all the other stuff, no. So that's one way that people respond to this miracle. The other way is in verse 18. As a demon-possessed man, as Jesus was getting into the boat, and by the way, don't sleep on that little phrase right there. As Jesus is getting into the boat, you see, they begged Jesus, I'm begging you, get out of here. You're disruptive, you're dangerous, we don't want you here. Sometimes, Jesus will give you exactly what you want. And if you don't want him, he's gracious enough to give it to you. And that's what happens. They don't want Jesus. And so he says, fine, I'll give you what you want. He gets into the boat, ready to leave. And the man who had been possessed with the demon begged Jesus. So there's a second kind of begging that's happening here. He's begging Jesus that he might be with them. I'm begging you, Jesus. Let me be with you. You see, the first group of people, the townspeople, they were repulsed by Jesus, found him dangerous and terrifying. And the other man, for whom God had great mercy, he found Jesus compelling and attractive. So much so that Jesus and the disciples are getting into the boat and they're ready to sail off. And the demon-possessed man, I just picture this. I don't know if it happened this way, but he's like two hands on the edge of the boat and he's putting one leg over trying to get into the boat. I don't want to fall down. But anyways, he's like getting into the boat. And then Jesus is like, what are you doing? Where do you think you're going? Oh. Can I not come with you? I want to come with you. I just lived a decade of my life alone. I just had people kick me out of town and chain me. I've had no hope. I've been lived in darkness. My whole life has been a wreck. And you come along and you save me. I want to be with you. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to have to go back to the tombs. I want to be with you. And what we would expect is Jesus to say, okay, be with me. But verse 19, Jesus did not permit him to come. Which teaches me, at least, the lesson, sometimes our greatest good is the result of God saying no. No. What do you mean no? This is what I want. I know what you want, but no. Keep reading. Jesus says, go home to your friends, and I want you to tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And so he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. Brothers and sisters, sometimes our greatest good is when Jesus says no, because the no to us is going to result in the greatest good for others, which is 10,000 yeses for them. You can't get in the boat because you're going to go home and you're going to proclaim the good news and you're going to tell them about me. And the healing I provided you is going to multiply to many of them. No to you, yes to them. Trust me. Wow. That's a paradigm shifter. And so the man obeys Jesus. He goes on the mission that Jesus has put him on, and he proclaims the excellencies of God. As Pastor Matt Lavalier preached a few weeks ago from 1 Peter 2:9, that the reason why Jesus has made us new again, that we may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called us out of darkness into his marvelous